The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
With cities and school districts holding elections this year, San Mateo County will pioneer the first regularly scheduled all-male countywide election in state history.
We'll talk to a leading campaign consultant about what this means for the voters and the candidates. The game is politics. The game is on.
I'm Kevin Mullen.
And I'm Mark Simon. Welcome to the game.
Because of legislation I carried, San Mateo County this year will be the first in the state to hold an all-male election. Ballots are going out as we speak, and an education program got underway recently to make sure voters know about this historic change and to make sure that they vote.
Will it work? How will it affect turnout? And what does it mean to the dozens of candidates and measures on the ballot? We pose these questions to Sarah Stern-Benoit, partner in the political consulting firm of TBWB. She has managed more than 50 board, bond, and tax measures and won nearly all of them. I'm sure you can remember exactly which ones you didn't win. Yes. Welcome. Thank you for being here. How bold is this to try and do something like this? Is this pretty radical stuff?
Well, I think in general, the trend over time has been for more and more voters to register to vote by mail. In your county, in San Mateo County, 58% of registered voters are actually registered to vote by permanent absentee ballot. And about the same percentage have actually participated in an election voting by mail. So some of those folks are not registered by mail, but maybe requested a mail ballot for a specific reason during a specific election. So many people have the habit of voting by mail already, and it's a trend really that's happened statewide. And this is just because there's been a drive over time. So it feels like a natural progression for elections in many ways. A lot of voters feel that rather than standing in line at the polls, they can vote from the convenience of their home. And just having that convenience, we believe over time, should increase voter participation because you don't need to take time off of work to go to the polls. You have the opportunity to really pore over your sample ballot materials and cast an educated vote. So that's another reason why we see participation, particularly on the revenue measures that I work on that are lower down the ballot. When people feel that they don't have the opportunity to really understand those measures, they simply don't vote on them. So we think that over time that this should actually help to encourage voter participation.
But hasn't voter turnout been declining over time, even as the number of people voting by mail has gone up? Wouldn't that suggest a trend not in the right direction?
There has been a decline, and particularly here, the last mail ballot election that was countywide was a special election. It was a county supervisor's race in May 2011, and the turnout was only 26%, so it was pretty low. And recent elections, the turnout has been substantially lower, actually, than we've seen in the past. The last gubernatorial election is a good example of that. That said, in other elections where there's more election noise, if you will, more things on the ballot, like the presidential election, that really capture more voter attention, then we are seeing pretty substantial voter participation. Our last two presidential elections actually had very, very high turnout in comparison to those prior. So I think it's a matter of capturing voter attention, of more interesting things on the ballot. We do have a lot of frequent elections in California, and that I think over time we will see a little bit of an increase in participation in these types of elections.
So the intent here, and there's a sort of a massive education effort underway to make sure people know that this change is happening. For those voters that aren't permanent vote-by-mail voters, suddenly they're automatically receiving a ballot in the mail, which is a change, and postage is paid. So there's certainly an effort to lower any of the barriers to voting. The question, of course, is will people still be inspired to fill out that ballot and drop that ballot in the mail? That's certainly the theory. That's the hope. I'm curious, and this has sort of been an unanswered question for me as somebody who's been involved in this effort, is what effect this is having on the campaigns. You still have a pool of voters out there who are the frequent voters, and those are the folks who get targeted with mail and when candidates precinct walk. But if every registered voter is getting a ballot, if I were a candidate, I guess, on the local level, I would feel strange walking past a home of somebody when I know that there's a ballot in that house, even if they're not a frequent voter. That might, at least might, encourage candidates to be communicating more with those infrequent voters. So as somebody who's a practitioner of this on the consultant side, strategically, how do you approach this when you know everybody now has a ballot? Is that a pool of untapped voters out there, or are you running pretty much a traditional kind of a campaign?
I would say it's a combination of both. These days in mail ballot elections, even when there's only a single issue on that mail ballot election, which we've had quite frequently here in San Mateo County for a lot of school district measures, parcel taxes on mail ballot, in mail ballot elections. So we still have to communicate with the folks who have the strongest voter history, always, because they're going to vote. But we do have an opportunity really to reach those who maybe otherwise wouldn't have gone to the polls to vote in a poll election, who have a ballot in hand. I think the tactic that we usually take is to speak with them early. So much like the county is doing an early voter education effort, that's what we would do on our campaigns. Find the types of people that we might know are going to be likely more favorable towards our issue, or likely more favorable towards an issue for a candidate. Seek them out, identify them as supportive, and then really continue to have a conversation with them to make sure that they mail their ballot back. So that is one of the strategies really for us to encourage voter participation among those that we think will be favorable.
There's another campaign dilemma, if that's the right word for it, which is increasingly and now exclusively the campaign and election day are essentially at the same time. I mean, it used to be the campaign built to a single event, which was the election day. Mm-hmm. And as you've decided the numbers about increasing use of the mail ballot, that's been less and less the case. But what's the challenge for a campaign when you know people are voting starting in the first week of October?
I think the challenge for the campaign is really to ramp up early, to make sure that you've had communication with those voters in advance of them receiving the ballot. Or at the same time, at least, when they receive their ballot, all the way through that month. So we really almost have election month instead of election day. Mm-hmm. There's still a very strong push towards the end, because one of the other trends that we notice is sort of a reverse bell curve of voter participation in mail ballot elections. So we see kind of a surge of people voting early in the election, a little bit of a dip, and then another surge as we get closer to Election Day.
Which surge is bigger? Is it the one closer to Election Day, or is it?
It really depends on the efforts of the campaign, I would say. That early surge are typically your likeliest voters, so the people who vote all the time. They receive a ballot in the mail, typically in a mail ballot election like this. There are very few issues to decide upon, so they vote quickly and mail their ballot back. For those who maybe are younger voters, have a lot of other things going on in their lives and maybe aren't paying as much attention to local politics and the local news, they're the ones holding on to their ballot. So they're the ones we have the opportunity to communicate with through that entire month. So if the campaign does its job and really encourages those people to vote, then we can see a pretty nice surge towards the end. I'd say that evens out in some communities, and others, the earlier one is a little bit bigger than that later one.
We're going to take a quick break. Stick around, we'll be right back.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
On November 3rd, 2015, San Mateo County voters will be participating in a historic all-mail ballot election. Watch for your official ballot in the mail the week of October 5th. Voter registration closes on October 19th for this election. Mail your ballot by Election Day on November 3rd in the postage-paid envelope provided. Please visit our website at shapethefuture.org or call us at 650-312-5222. Voting by mail is easy and convenient. Your vote counts.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon. He's Kevin Mullen. Over here we have Sarah Stern-Benoit, political consultant, that specializes in local bond and tax measures, and we're talking about the all-mail election. I described it a minute ago as a bold experiment, and I want to put the emphasis on the word experiment. What's your best guess? Acknowledging it's just a guess and we won't hold you to it. We won't even rerun this tape somewhere some other time. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think more people are going to show up? It's going to be about normal? You think it might be less than usual?
I think most likely the participation is probably going to be very similar to the last countywide mail ballot election. I think we could see a little bit of an uptick. Since 2011, more people have registered to vote by mail. There was a presidential election in the middle there where both parties were really encouraging people to vote by mail and vote early. So I think there is a chance that we might see a little bit of an uptake more into that 30% range. But I think, this is an experiment, and it's one that we'll see, I think, improve over time as people understand that this is the way that they'll be voting in the future.
Right, and I've been reminding people that this is just that, an experiment to gather data on what the turnout is going to look like, what that model looks like at the end of the 3 elections.
So if it stinks, don't give up on it? Is that...
something like that, since my name's attached to this thing. But it's a 3-election pilot up through 2018. And at the end of that process, the data will be analyzed in terms of turnout. And one thing we do know, though, is that costs will be reduced because you won't have neighborhood polling places. You'll have 32 polling locations throughout the county, 2 early voting centers, high-tech wired centers, and that kind of thing. I'm interested, just as a consultant, all of these changes that are happening. We're talking about the San Mateo County specific scenario, but the governor also signed a bill automatically registering people through the DMV with an opt-out provision. There's clearly a coordinated effort, and as a legislator, I'm part of this, but the 2014 turnout was so abysmal. Right. There are all sorts of levers being pulled across the state. San Mateo County is one example. What's it going to take to increase turnout? And Mark touched on this, that those numbers continue to slide. But as a consultant, you are targeting voters, right? You're focusing on those that can swing an election. But is that a different kind of thought process than as a citizen? I mean, how do you, as a citizen, view all of these efforts to try to engage more people in democracy? And does that kind of come up against your role as a consultant, which is in many cases the ability to target is what is most critical in terms of having success?
He's putting it politely. You don't want everybody to show up. You want just your voters to show up.
How do you even model when everybody's now on the voter lists and there's no voting pattern to point to? This is really uncharted water we're in if you're a consultant in California.
To some extent, I would agree with you that it is. Although voting patterns tend to be fairly constant. Those who vote habitually are going to continue to vote habitually, generally, no matter how we conduct the election, because they have the habit and the history of voting and participating. And I think that's really the challenge. And it's a challenge for me as a citizen, it's a challenge for me as a consultant, because the voters that we often want to reach are the ones who don't participate as often. So anything that we can do, registering automatically at the DMV, I think is a wonderful idea for people who maybe just don't get around to registering to vote. They moved and they're, to another town in San Mateo County, and they're not going to, do anything other than change the address on their driver's license. Well, then they're not going to go in and necessarily re-register to vote. So anything that we can do to really engage those voters who don't have the usual habits of voting every time, I think will over time help encourage voter participation. And I think one of those things also is they tend to be younger, working, and therefore don't have as much time to go to the polls. And there are a lot of folks who are rushing out the door on that Tuesday election morning to go to work and simply can't get to the polls. So this will help.
What are the risks? What are you worried about? What wakes you up at 3 in the morning thinking, oh my God, what if this happens? I mean, are you worried, there's a hit piece that drops late and a significant percentage of people have already voted and they can't be influenced by that? I mean, you find out that the other side in your campaign has been stealing from the school district you're trying to pass. I mean, what are the kinds of risks that are inherent in this? Starting with, I guess, the fact that it's a large unknown universe still. As much as you know what you know based on your experience, we've never done this before.
I think the risks from my perspective in the types of elections that I work on are really that voters receive a ballot in the mail and don't know what to do with it. They don't open it, they don't look at it because, for one thing, this is an off-year election. It is an established countywide election date, but a lot of people don't have history in voting in this election. So they'll receive a ballot in the mail, not know what to do with it. It ends up in the recycling bin. That's a fear. I think the other piece is making sure that people know they have options. So you don't have to vote by mail in this election. You can go to a local polling place and vote at the polls if you want to. It won't be, your neighbor down the street's garage that you've gone to in recent elections. It'll be somewhere else. But people do have that opportunity. There's also the early voting option. So I think just understanding that if you did accidentally recycle that ballot, that you can still vote, that you can still participate. So I think those are the fears, mostly about voters being educated, understanding there's an election coming up, and knowing what to do with that ballot.
Okay, we're going to take another quick break. Stick around, we'll be right back.
On November 3rd, 2015, San Mateo County voters will be participating in a historic all-mail ballot election. Watch for your official ballot in the mail the week of October 5th. Voter registration closes on October 19th for this election. Mail your ballot by Election Day on November 3rd in the postage-paid envelope provided. Please visit our website at shapethefuture.org or call us at 650-312-5222. Voting by mail is easy and convenient. Your vote counts.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon. Kevin Mullen over here. Sarah Stern-Benoit, political consultant par excellence. We're talking about the all-mail election. Is word getting out? I got this thing in the mail. I live in Redwood City. The city clerk obviously thinks they need to do this kind of stuff, send out mailing pieces and stuff like that. But on the other hand, I know what's going on. I pay close attention more than a lot of other people do. Is word getting out? Are you worried that it isn't? I know Kevin held a news conference. I think it was just recently to sort of kick off the attention this needs. A lot of stuff is coming in the mail. Every mail piece you get from a candidate includes vote from home, or it's all mail election. So I keep asking the same question. I'll ask it again. Is the word getting out? Are you worried that it's not?
I think I can't confirm whether or not the word is getting out, but I think we have definitely, seen that the mail pieces are landing. There was another one that came out from the county. This one's a city mailer with a lot of information about voting by mail, and certainly I think people are aware of it. There are kind of more signs that there's an election going on in terms of signs that you see in people's yards, mail coming from the various candidates, and I think everybody is really making an effort to make sure people understand that it's a mail ballot election. In terms of folks that we've been talking to through our campaigns, I think for the most part, they're aware that there's an election happening, and we always remind them that it's a vote by mail election this time around. Most of the people, again, that we're talking to have some sort of history of voting by mail in the past. So they're more likely to understand that fact than a lot of other voters. Others we're informing for the first time, and we'll be continuing to communicate with them through the month.
Well, let me ask you a question. Since Sarah cited the 58% number, is that one of the reasons why you think San Mateo County, and I could ask both of you, is San Mateo County the right place to try this out?
I think so, because we have a strong track record of moving toward VBM. If you actually look at the turnout, who comes out in a local election, that number is not 58%, it's actually much higher. It's into the 70s in terms of actual ballots cast, if not close to 80. So this is not going to be a foreign concept to almost 80% of the folks that bother participating. It's the 20% that I'm concerned about in terms of the traditional poll voters, and those folks are the target of the communications. I would also mention, I really believe, just sort of following this process, that California is moving in this direction en masse, that there's something called the Colorado hybrid model that our Secretary of State has embraced, that many legislative leaders, including myself, have embraced, where voters automatically get a ballot, and instead of traditional polling locations, there are voting centers, which are high-tech wired voting centers throughout a community. It's worked in Colorado with a few minor tweaks that would be needed, certainly for a state of 38 million people. I just think at some point we're going to get there. And San Mateo County is then at the forefront of that change and working through some of our processes. So when that statewide change happens, we're sort of ahead of the game. So I think we're in a pretty good spot.
Do you agree San Mateo County is a pretty good place to try this out? I
think so. I mean, it's a very diverse county. And you have a large percentage of people who have opted to vote by mail anyway. And you also have a history of having this one countywide mail ballot election, so it's also been sort of tested here in one way or another. So it seems like a good place to give it a go, to see how it works over time.
It's there are going to be more of these, as you mentioned. It's 3 elections. I gather does that include the 2016 presidential?
No.
It stops short of that, right?
Correct. So the even year elections, because you have federal races with districts that cross county boundaries, the pilot can only be within the county in these local municipal races. So we haven't crossed that bridge yet. And that something like that would have to be more of a statewide kind of a change that is enacted.
You see more of this coming? You see more? I mean, people are already voting more by mail than they used to. Mm-hmm. But do you see a sort of official sanctioning of more and more all mail, or even online? I mean, what do you think is coming in the not too distant future in terms of this sort of thing?
Well, I think there's certainly a lot of interest in improving voter participation and being able to register to vote online, this automatic DMV change of registering people to vote, in addition to just the general drive in the state of California to encourage people to vote by mail, which has been working. A lot of people are registered to vote as permanent absentee voters in much higher percentages than there have been in the past. So I think it's a trend that will continue. I think the big piece of the puzzle is really encouraging that voter participation and educating folks that this is the way we're going to be voting in the future.
But as you referenced earlier in the interview, so much of turnout is dependent on what's on the ballot and whether or not it intrigues people. Mm-hmm. And this is happening in the middle of a period of time when everybody seems to be pretty unhappy with the status quo and the way politics and government is working. Now, that's a broad, sweeping statement, and local elections are different. But you have an awful lot of people whose view is a sort of a pox on the whole thing. So at the same time, we're trying to encourage people by making it easier to register, making it easier to vote. I guess the question is, why aren't the people voting if it's so much easier than it used to be?
Is this a deeper problem, absolutely, than just the mechanics of it?
Yeah.
And I know that answer is yes. The question is, what do you do about it, right?
I mean, I think...
Solve the entire political landscape. You've got 10 minutes.
I think, unfortunately, I don't have the answers to all of that. But I think it is a trend that's happened more recently, especially on the national political stage, that seems to be impacting us here in the state of California. That people are simply fed up with government, fed up with the political process, and just don't believe that it's functioning for them and working for them. And I think that's where we have this really great opportunity, actually, in local elections like this one, where people can feel the direct impact of voting for a school bond measure or voting for a candidate that's going to directly represent them here in their own city. And I think that's an educational opportunity for us here locally. To really encourage that participation, because I think once you vote in a local election, once you see the results of that vote, you're maybe more likely to pay attention to some of the bigger issues and feel like you have the ability to make a change.
Election night's going to be real different, isn't it?
Election night will be different in many ways. One way is that most of the ballots will be in already. So for the most part, unless it's a very close election, we should know on election night the results. So that's a little bit different than a poll election, where sometimes you're waiting midnight the next day, the following 3 days to find out that result. So we should know pretty close to 8 o'clock. San Mateo County has a pretty good history of counting most of the ballots by then. You can kind of breathe a sigh of relief at 8 o'clock and know what the outcome is.
We're start making a list of people you're going to get even with. That's about all the time we have. Sarah Stern-Benoit, thank you for being with us. Good luck on your ballot measures. I didn't give you a chance to plug your Redwood City school bond, right?
That's correct.
So good luck on election night, and Kevin and I are going to be live on election night. Maybe we can get you on the phone or something, talk about how you think, do a follow-up to this interview. So thank you for being with us, and thank you for being with us. I'm Mark Simon.
And I'm Kevin Mullane.
Thanks for joining us, and see us next time on The Game.